So now we are heading towards the second session. So I would like to request Dr. J.R. Sande, who is the chair of the second session, from and to take over the session. I would like to request her to start. Thank you.
Broadly speaking, the mental health concerns that death row prisoners have, and the findings of the project that we've done with death row prisoners and inquiring into their mental health. Just before I start on this, what we did in the project, one of the important things I think for us to drive in the project was the law, of course, but also an understanding of mental health. Which is not to pinpoint the mental health of a person to a particular point and look at vulnerabilities and risk factors that these prisoners have been exposed to by virtue of the kind of lives they've led. Some of it one could relate with their socio-economic circumstances and the surrounding environment, but some of it in any case is very objectively considered risk factors for poor social as well as mental health outcomes later in life. So where does this, as people in a law university, it's important for us to ground our work within the law. And as far as the law is concerned, as we spoke about Bachchan Singh and we spoke about mitigation. And one of the grounds that Bachchan Singh lays down, two grounds actually, that Bachchan Singh lays down, which are very relevant for mental health, are to look at the mental and emotional state of the person at the time of offense, and the other is to inquire into the mental defectiveness of the person. So I mean the word is pejorative, but Bachchan Singh in 1980 was already indicating that you need to look at mental defect at the time of offense. Unfortunately, it took us 40 years for the judiciary to realize what that actually requires, which is that a death row prisoner be examined by a mental health professional. Till now, we didn't have the prisons wouldn't allow us to go into prison as defense attorneys and get a mental health evaluation done of the prisoner. So you completely took out a requirement of Bachchan Singh from consideration, because a lawyer is not going to be able to do that. And Justice Lokur's judgment in December 2018, where he specifically allows mental health professionals to now access death row prisoners as part of the right to fair trial of a prisoner. It took us 40 years to get there, but we're finally there, and hopefully we'll start seeing more robust development of mitigation as such within the death penalty framework. So Bachchan Singh is one of the reasons why we thought of doing this project. The other is, in 2014, there was this judgment by the Supreme Court, Shatrughan Chauhan, which looks at post-mercy. So the president has rejected 15 people's mercy, and they come before the court saying the mercy was either delayed in being decided, or two of the prisoners said, we have a mental illness and you can't execute us. And the court said, very well, that's fair. Insanity becomes a ground for what we call as supervening circumstances. So people with insanity can't be executed anymore. But what that translates into in terms of mental illness, we don't know, because these prisoners have schizophrenia, and criminal law or other aspects of law are in any case obsessed with schizophrenia as the only form of mental illness. So, so the fact that the court went into the idea that persons with mental illness cannot be executed begged the question actually, but how many people do you actually have on death row who have a mental illness? So how many people would actually be eligible for this kind of exemption? And the third reason was India doesn't have any jurisprudence on persons with intellectual disability and how criminal law is to deal with it. Criminal law, as we all know, is based on the reasonable person, rationality, but while it might make certain concessions for persons with mental illness, it does no such thing for persons with intellectual disability. Especially in the death penalty framework, when again you're speaking of mental defect, and again I agree that the term is pejorative, but you're talking about that, but you have no jurisprudence or framework to say how a person with intellectual disability to be treated by the judiciary. Now, in the US, you have a complete bar. Persons with intellectual disability cannot be given the death penalty. But in India, you don't have any such thing. So that also required us to look at a very important gap in the law in terms of to whom should the death penalty be given. And the last thing that sort of prompted us to do it was the Supreme Court has been very um, humane sometimes in its approach to death row prisoners, in that when there is a prisoner on death row and they've been on death row for very, very long with their mercy petition pending before the President, the Supreme Court, starting from the 1970s, started commuting death sentences based on this idea of mental agony. So their reasoning was that because of the uncertainty of the outcome, because caused due to executive delay and the President not deciding mercy petition, there is a mental agony among in this particular death row prisoner, and therefore one should commute it. And my understanding or my motivation in doing the project with respect to that was to understand, is mental agony regarding uncertainty of death really just at the last stage, or does it begin that uncertainty that I don't know when I'm going to be executed, I don't know when my case is going to come up, does it start much earlier? So I'm just going to now present some of the findings of the project, and then I would also like to talk about the challenges that we faced in doing the project. One of the findings of this project, which should actually come as no surprise to any of us, is the social environment that the prisoner has been exposed to. So we found a large majority of our prisoners have been exposed to child abuse. Quite a few of them have been exposed to sexual abuse as children. A lot of them have left school, have dropped out of school because of severe financial constraints, and they've had to enter adult spaces of employment at a very, very young age. And of course, there's terrible amount of neglect within the family for these prisoners. And that takes us back to the question of mitigation. What do you consider mitigating circumstances? So Bachchan Singh and cases thereafter have looked at various categories of factors that one must look at. They've looked at socioeconomic circumstances, they might have looked at age. Nobody has actually tied all of this in to say, what does it mean to have a prisoner who has been abused as a child, sexually, physically, who has had no education? What kind of impact has his life had on this person? So we end up taking a very checkbox approach to mitigation, which then skews the process in that sense. So one of the major findings of the project has been to be able to unearth these experiences of the prisoners and then to talk about what this might mean for each prisoner. The other finding that we've had with respect to mental illness has been that so we've interviewed 88 prisoners across MP, Chhattisgarh, Karnataka, Kerala and Delhi. 88 death row prisoners and their families, and what we found is that 50 out of 88 prisoners at least have one mental illness. So you're talking epidemic proportions. 50 out of 88, yeah. So that's close to around 60%. So prisoners on death row use a lot of substances, mostly tobacco. It's contraband in prison. There's heavy penalty for using contraband in prison, but they manage to get it in through either their relatives or other prisoners who go for trial hearings and then come with it stashed in various places of the body. And suicide. So, of the 88 prisoners that we interviewed, 10% of them had attempted suicide in prison, and the lifetime prevalence, I can't call it prevalence, but in their lifetimes, around 30 people had attempted suicide. So 10% in prison, and 30 out of 88, 30 out of 65 actually, in lifetime. And what does that tell us about the prison system? What does it tell us about what is happening to prisoners on death row? So initially we didn't think about doing associating mental illness with conditions in prison or conditions before the person got into prison, but this idea of substance use and suicide and depression and the high prevalence of it got us thinking about what is happening in prison that is leading to this. And we realized through prisoner narratives, through the psychometric tools that we've used, that that a lot of the prisoners are facing what is known as institutionalized stigma. The law treats them differently, the prison manuals treat them differently, and therefore it bleeds into how the prisoners talk to them. So the prisoners treat them differently. There is also Anup spoke about them not being able to study, them not being given work, and that kind of emptiness that it creates in them again pushes them towards this massive amount of substance use. The other thing which we don't think about when we talk about death penalty or death row prisoners is their families. A lot of the prisoners have had to stop meeting their families or meet their families very rarely because the families are hundreds of kilometers sometimes away from where the prisoner is actually lodged, because death row prisoners are generally lodged in central prisons and the families are from villages or so it takes them time, it takes them effort, it takes them daily wages, loss of daily wages to meet the prisoner, and therefore the prisoner starts losing any connection that he or she had with their life before prison. And that kind of isolation, coupled with the fact that they don't have any way out of thinking about that isolation or thinking about when their case is going to be decided, whether they're going to die, what is going to happen to their children, their families, their parents, is creating this, it's not strange, but creating this whole mess of a situation where you don't know what to do with them. You're not going to let them work, but you're also going to end up banning substances in prison.
There are around 5,500 prisoners housed inside Roda Central Prison. When I joined 3 years back, there were 4,800 prisoners at that time. So the number of prisoners, both under trial and convicts, is increasing day by day. And that is the overcrowding which is causing a lot of problems, which we'll be discussing. So, rate of imprisonment in India is 25 prisoners per 1 lakh population, which is very low compared to the other countries. And among that, there are 90% who are first offenders. And the ratio of offenders and recidivists, that is repeat offenders, is 9:1. Next thing is prison population has been steadily increasing, as I discussed, because of many reasons. Among these prisoners, majority of prisoners are males, about 96%, and 2/3 are under trial inmates, and rest are the convicts. So, as we see in society, the stigma attached to the mental illness, the same situation is there inside the prisons. There is a lot of stigma and discrimination which is related to the presence of mental illness. If some inmate suffers from psychiatric illness like depression or anxiety disorder, and if you wish to come to a psychiatrist, there is a lot of inhibition on his part, because he always keeps on thinking what other inmates will think about him, and so that sometimes is a deterrent factor in providing treatment. But in cases who are severe enough, and when jailers and officers refer those prisoners to me, then that thing becomes more easier. But what I want to stress is that the stigma is lot inside the prisons. Then we'll talk about the presence of mental illnesses in these prison inmates. There are various mental illnesses which are found to be present in these prisoners. There are illnesses like common mental disorders like anxiety disorders, insomnia, adjustment disorders, and mild to moderate depression, which is very common in these prisoners. Then there are certain serious mental disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar mood disorders, and major depressive disorder, severe depression with suicidal ideas. So all these disorders are found in prisoners. So when these prisoners come for the first time inside the prison, there is an acute stress reaction. Many of the prisoners who are in a state of shock, initially they are in a phase of denial, and there is a lot of anxiety, restlessness, depression, and many times they get suicidal ideas. It has been found that within first 24 to 48 hours, many prisoners they try to commit suicide, and many of them they are suffering from substance use disorders. Many of them they are using some or the other drug before entering inside the prison. So the incidence is about 70 to 90%. So 70 to 90% of the inmates who come inside the prison, they have used some of the other substance previously when they were outside. So initially, this feeling of helplessness and suicidal ideations, and because they have poor coping skills, they are unable to adjust to the environment, and a lot of hostility inside, and so that all these things and interplay of all these stresses leads to psychiatric morbidity in them. So there are triggers like no visit of relatives, the delay in judicial proceedings, the delay in getting parole and furlough, and news of close family members' illness or death. These are also the precipitating factors in few of the prisoners that lead to occurrence of some kind of psychiatric illness. Then there are various people, individuals with personality disorders. And in prisons, the most common personality disorder which is found is antisocial personality disorder. So, which is characterized by the long-term patterns of disregard for or violation of rights of the others. And they have low moral sense or conscience. And there is also history of crime or some kind of legal problem which they are facing. So in these antisocial personality disorders, many of them they are having traits. They may not have antisocial personality disorder per se, but they are having traits of antisocial personality. And we very often encounter this arrogance, lack of remorse, and they have anger control issues in them. And most importantly, they are manipulative. They try to manipulate the system. They try to manipulate officers and doctors and the whole healthcare system. Sometimes they fake the illness. Many times they want to take benefit of that. They fake that they are depressed, or they fake that they are having some major psychiatric illness. So it becomes very important to distinguish a person who is really suffering from psychiatric illness from these manipulative individuals. If we go back to their history, the childhood history and family history in these antisocial personality disorder patients, many times we find that there is history of broken families, as my previous speaker told. So in many cases, the child is deserted by the biological father. There is neglect by his mother in childhood. Many times they are born out of wedlock, and sometimes there are constant fights between their parents and some kind of conflict going on between them, and that leads to a lot of trauma to them as a child, and sometimes that becomes a precursor or precipitating factor for future criminality. In a few cases, there are antisocial personality traits in father, and in many cases, we see in adolescents particularly, influence of peers. Peer group influence also is an important causative factor. Now, the last broad group of disorders from which these prisoners suffer is the substance use disorder. As I said, 70 to 90% of these prisoners are suffering from or have used some or the other substance in the past. So substances like alcohol, cannabis, opioids, and many others drugs are used by them. And many of these individuals, they commit crime when they were under the influence of substance. And when they are inside the prison, initially when they are in a state of shock, many times they are suffering from withdrawals. Many of them, we have to manage their withdrawals, we have to detoxify them. And nowadays, these cases are seen very commonly. So, I will brief in short about the etiology of these various psychiatric disorders. So, there is biopsychosocial model which explains almost all psychiatric disorders. There are certain biological factors, certain psychological issues, and few social or environmental things which leads to causation of these illnesses. So in biological, the genetic vulnerability in many patients, there is a family history of psychiatric illness. In psychological factors, there are poor coping skills. They are having some personality disorder which makes them more prone for psychiatric illness, like dependent personality disorders, or obsessive compulsive personality disorders, or paranoid personality disorders. So persons who are suffering from these personality traits, they are more prone to develop psychiatric illnesses. And the last factor is social factor. So in social factors, what is happening around the that particular individual inside his family and in society by and large can lead to many psychiatric illnesses. So family circumstances, then about the occupational stressors, or some there is major event in a person's life, like death of a parent or death of a spouse, that can act as a trigger. So interplay of these biological, psychological, and social factors leads to the mental illnesses like depression, anxiety, and other psychotic disorders. So now here we are talking about the presence of mental illness in prisons. So prisons are bad for mental health, obviously, for obvious reasons, because as I said, there are many negative factors which leads to the causation of this illness, or at least precipitation of various illnesses. Like I said, overcrowding, that is very important precipitating factor. Then there are various forms of violence occurring inside the prison. Then there are enforced solitudes or segregation of these prisoners. In few cases, lack of privacy that can act as a trigger. Then there is lack of meaningful activities. They don't have much to do inside. Then many of the individuals, inmates, they have insecurity about their future prospects, about their work, occupation, and about their relationship. Also, inadequate health services is also important factor, because in Maharashtra there are only 2 central prisons who have a full-time psychiatrist. So many central prisons and sub-jails and district jails, they don't have a medical professional like psychiatrist to serve there and to take care of the prisoners there. So because of interplay of all these factors and these negative phenomena inside the prison, many prisoners or inmates, they are at risk of developing mental illnesses. And as I said, there is increased risk of suicide in prisons, which is an unfortunate phenomenon, and that is a common manifestation of the cumulative effect of all these factors. So I will just brief about what we do inside the prison. We have a hospital inside the central prison, and there are 4 medical officers, 1 psychiatrist, that is me, and 1 clinical psychologist. And whenever this inmate is referred to us, we do psychological assessment of that prisoner, and we decide whether he is suffering from some mental illness, and then we give pharmacotherapy and individual counseling, and we enroll them for group therapy, and there are recreational and vocational activities going on there. So, in short, we do all these things, and these are all facilities which are available for prisoners inside the prison. So, talking about the death row convicts. So, there are two things which I would like to highlight. One thing is the segregation in different security zones. The prisoners or convicts who are on death row, they are segregated from other prisoners, and somehow that acts as a precipitating factor or stressor for them, because they are not able to interact with other prisoners, and sometimes that is a positive factor. Then another important thing is these prisoners, they are confined in a separate cells inside this Phasi yard. That is the name we call it, that yard. So in Phasi yard, they are kept in a separate cells for most of the time. There is particular time slot in a few hours in the morning and few hours in the evening. They are out and they are they can mingle with other inmates, but by and large they are in a separate cell. So that is something which also leads to a lot of stress on them. And of course there is a lot of discrimination among inmates. Somebody who's on death row, definitely other inmates or other prisoners, they discriminate them because of kind of heinous crime they have committed. So I have observed in many of these death row convicts symptoms like insomnia, panic attacks, depression, helplessness. Many of them, they have very blunt affect. Aloofness is another symptom. And in few cases I have seen severe depression with tremendous weight loss, wherein we have to ship that particular prisoner to the civil hospital for further management. And suicidal ideations and attempts, that is also not very rare, it is common. Yeah. In last 3 years, one inmate committed suicide who was on the death row. And there are few prisoners who suffer from psychotic disorders. They are having delusions and hallucinations and other schizophrenia-like symptoms. So what I want to say is that these prisoners who are on death row, probably they have the prevalence of psychiatric illness is more in them compared with the other prisoners. But I don't have data, or I have not systematically studied about the prevalence, but this is my observation that they are more prone to develop psychiatric illnesses. Also, I would like to stress that in spite of all this, there are few prisoners who are on death row who are not much bothered about what is happening. They have very callous attitude. They are manipulative, and they mock the system. There was one prisoner who said that hang me today itself. They're so callous and they don't have concern, and still, they are not aware that what is happening with them or what kind of punishment they have been given. So, but they are very few, I will say. So, a lot of malingering from their side sometimes happens, because whenever we start psychiatric medications, they are entitled to get some extra diet like biscuits and all that. So, many times they try to fake psychiatric symptoms. So, that is also the other part of the story. But they are few, I will say. So, there is this death row syndrome. Those convicts who are on death row, they suffer from many psychiatric problems, and they become helpless, they become hopeless and worthless, and they don't even appeal the legal system. So this is called as a death row syndrome, and I will say few of them, they do suffer from this syndrome, and we are there to treat them. We are treating them, and we are successful in bringing them back to the normalcy from these symptoms. So I would like to end my talk here with this piece of poem by written by a death row convict. Thank you.
So I'm going to make a few observations that I've had from my engagement with the whole death penalty issue as a as a mental health professional, more like as a psychiatrist. And there's 4 or 5 things that I've learned. One of learnings out of having to write some reports for somebody who's been on the death row. From a practical point of view, what is very amazing is that this particular person has been in the prison from a period of 1994. We are looking at 2018. There are continuous treatment records for severe mental illness, and this person being treated for mental illness. So that's what you see in the prison health records. And then if you look at their trial records, through having gone through trial from the lower courts right up to the Supreme Court, there's absolutely no mention of mental illness. So this is like 2 parallel systems which seem to run, and they do not at all interact in some sort of way. So there's an entire trial. This person has been through 2 trials, in fact, during that same time, from 1994 to 2019. And there is no mention, not once by the defense counsel, the prosecution, or anybody about any form of mental illness or the fact that this person is receiving continuous treatment for the last 25 years or so. So I find that really odd, and I don't understand how the system works. The other thing that I found was extremely odd was how difficult it was to get access to even the medical records of this person who is on a death row, and how the system almost conspires to ensure that there is no external audit or measure of oversight on the health side of things. So I found that extremely scary and also surprisingly odd. I've largely engaged in civil law side, mental health from a rights perspective, civil laws, rather than from a criminal law perspective. And one of the things that on the civil law side, or at least the human rights side, we've always fought for is the notion that people with mental illness have capacity, should have legal capacity, and their legal capacity should be respected. So we should not use mental illness as grounds for saying that people lack legal capacity. The dangers of making the same argument too strongly on the criminal side is very obvious. And so you kind of get caught between this situation where you do want to make the legal capacity argument because it's a battle that has been fought very hard, and you kind of try to get recognition that people with mental health problems should have full capacity and their decisions being respected. But when you're into the death penalty argument on the criminal side, you're actually now saying, well, people might have impaired capacities, and can we have some thing for it? Either we make adjustments in their trial or we make adjustments in their sentencing, which means their mental illness and the lack of capacity or the impaired capacity should act as some kind of a mitigation for them. So that creates it's a problem for me. How do I balance this out in my own head of these 2 very competing kind of ideas? The third thing that really becomes problematic for me as a mental health professional is, the whole trial thing. If somebody has a mental health problem and somebody has a severe mental health problem, like this particular case that I talked to you about, and if the defense has never raised the issue of mental illness, I mean, is that even a fair trial? Was this person able to actually instruct their counsel? If you have a severe enough mental health problem and you're not able to tell your counsel that I have a severe mental health problem, then is that even a fair trial from that point of view? That if you're not able to instruct counsel. On the other hand, do you want to? I've had times when lawyers have said, should we claim that this person is not fit to stand trial? What I do know in the reality, what happens is when you claim that you're not fit to stand trial, is you will never stand trial and you'll probably spend the rest of your life inside an institution. And is that an alternative that we want to propose? That people who are not fit to stand trial end up in a mental health institution where they spend the rest of their lives never actually undergoing trial, so we don't even know of their guilt. Because, there's a presumption that they might be not guilty, but since they've not stood trial, that has never happened at all. So if you're going to argue for mental illness as grounds at the trial stage, there are difficulties in how we do that. When you're arguing on mitigation at the sentencing stage, let's say you come to the point where people have been found guilty and now you're saying on the grounds of mental illness there should be some mitigation. The question that's come up is which mental illness? Which mental illness is sufficient mitigation? The fact that you have depression and anxiety, is that good enough to claim mitigation? I know that judges will say, well, anyone who's in that situation will be depressed and anxious, so big deal, why should we take that as a mitigating factor? On the other hand, you also heard Dr. Mahmoodi present data that people, if you are in prison and if you are on the death row, then you probably face further and extra stresses. The whole issue of personality disorder is something that we've really not been able to sort out. Psychiatry and mental health is bedeviled with it. It's a construct with very low validity, very low reliability, and we use it, and it might have some clinical validity, it might have some clinical value, but when you bring it to the legal system and when you bring it into sentencing, then how much importance should we give to a construct which actually has very little reliability and validity? And so that whole issue of personality disorders is a problem. And as Maitri said that, mostly is schizophrenia or psychosis. That's what judges kind of consider mental illness. Mental illness means somebody who has, mental illness means somebody who is pagal, according to the judge. Let's put it that way. And there is their definition of pagal, which is how people are. So I'm not giving you answers, I'm just throwing up these questions for us to think, because these are questions that I've been grappling with as to how one deals with these issues. And the final and ethical issue which I would grapple with as a psychiatrist is, let's say that somebody, like Ullah is a good example, of somebody who has severe depression. And as a psychiatrist, you're asked to treat this person. Two ethical issues. One is the issue of consent. What about consent? Do we overrule consent? Do we take consent? And I'll tell you why consent might play into what is the next bit, which is, if I'm going to treat somebody so that they become well enough, so that they are now fit to undergo the sentence, then that creates a huge problem, isn't it? Am I, as a clinician, better off leaving them in because they live? Or am I better off as a clinician doing everything possible to, into inverted commas, cure them so that now they can be seen by the prison system as being fit for their punishment? And I think that's a real problem which we as clinicians really need to grapple with. There are a whole host of ethical issues on either side. Our ethical issue around doing the best for people and about treating people and about helping people get well. On the other hand, knowing that if you help people get well in these circumstances, then you're also creating a situation where they're likely to hang because they're now fit for it. Luckily for the whole Buller thing was that it got commuted, but otherwise it was always going to be a major complication. Do you treat this person with severe depression who is suicidal? I mean, it's the paradox of it, isn't it? You're treating severe depression of a person who's suicidal, who's trying to kill himself, and the state says, well, no, you have to treat him and you have to get him well and you stop him from killing himself because we want to kill him. It's the whole paradox of all of this really causes all sorts of ethical dilemmas. I'm not going to give you answers because I don't have any either. So I'm going to stop here because I think some of these things need discussion rather than answers. So I'm going to stop here, and I know we're running a bit late, so in the interest of time, I think let's open it up.
children experiencing developmental disabilities, and I've been working for quite some time as a mental health professional. And what I also often see is a lot of these children get diagnosed with autism, intellectual disability, sensory processing issues, etc., which come in the way of expression, which come in the way of socialization, which come in the way of their daily routine. What I'm trying to say is that while these are some of the kids which come for treatment and therapy, just to give you an example, this one kid who has a lot of sensory issues, gets pushed constantly, is not able to say to his friend that I'm getting pushed here, so don't push me, but in turn goes and pushes him so harsh that the teacher will really punish him and not the provoker. It's just a small instance of what we see as bully and being bullied at a larger context of laws where people get punished for crimes, and so many times there is this defense that he did this and I did that. So I was just reflecting on what when there are people who don't feel any remorse of the guilt, why should they feel guilty? Because our culture, the context that we come in is so complex that it is really difficult to remove the person from that situation. So again, I don't know that there are these answers, but I just feel that we cannot ignore one and the other and really think of these two parameters as well.
All of us who are sitting here are antisocial because we are criticizing that which society refuses it. So all decisions are antisocial, all criticisms are antisocial, because as a political activist we have always faced this problem. That even if you are doing demonstration in support of something, you are picked up and you are always considered as antisocial. So what is this characterization of antisocial? Because I think it is both in psychiatry as well as in social work. I think I've seen this term being used widely and very loosely all the time. Perhaps some more thing will be useful. My second point was, that came to my mind from your last point, Somitra's last point, is that I got a call about 5 years back from a lawyer, saying that I have a person who is going to be hacked, and can you mobilize some mental health professionals to show that, this person is having a mental health problem, so it can be avoided. This is a same kind of dilemma. I'm not a mental health professional, and this is not only in this, but even in terms of torture or police custody, there this kind of requests do come. That can you do something in order to have an inquiry or postpone certain kind of prosecution? It really creates problems, and this has a very intimate relationship with say legal profession, just like in medicine. Like, do you have are there certain things that doctors should never be doing? Same way, are there certain things that lawyers should never be doing? Are there things that lawyers should never be, say, defending and providing support to? I have seen many sensitive lawyers who will not take case of a rapist or not take case of the husband who beats the wife, And there are certain kind of principles they would like to have. But at the same time, you have ethical principle or professional ethics saying that everybody should have a legal representation. So how do you reconcile? I think this is the same thing that we have in medicine. You have in there. But everything goes, Any strategy is justifiable in order to get an immediate order. Rather than looking at the larger ethical and moral underpinning of what you are doing is very problematic, and that means you are two instrumentalists, two consequentialists. Rather than it's like ends and means. The means are not very important. The ends are always important. I think how do you reconcile the same thing both in medicine as well as in law profession?
How do we create such a strong and able support system to keep in check the inmates' mental health, physical health, or their well-being in general? How do we create a strong and able system like that?
We are talking about considering abolition of the death penalty, legal issues, ethical issues. From the medical perspective or the mental health perspective, um, from the sentencing to actual execution, there is a lot of time which goes. So, can we consider reform as a very major uh, and work around creating a model and a system which can help at least taking the person towards reform. Because if we say that, okay, pleading guilty or pleading guilty for the issue, but what next? What else? Is the big question which I think should be addressed, because any person who is left lonely, even not over death row, but even we are left lonely for a week or a month, we have some kind of mental health implications of isolation.
How to assess and give the exact difference or exact help of the mental health professionals rather than isolating or understanding whether the illness developed after all the processes, the long gap, conviction, under trial. So how as a mental health professional or including the law perspective, how we can differentiate that and make a more specific comment about the same.
It seems the Supreme Court also is interested in that idea. There's a case before it, which is, and it's hearing about experiences in Rajasthan in particular, where they've actually tried to kind of promote the idea of open prisons. And I'm just curious if any of the panelists have any thoughts on that in the context of mental health, because I see complete correlations between isolation that you just spoke about and other impacts that
we spoke in the last session about lack of guidelines and is the amount of lack of jurisprudence when it comes to specific steps that need to be taken in the administrative part of an execution actually happening. Similarly, and in the kind of offences that death penalty gets attracted, especially the terrorism cases, Arun Ferreira's experience, for instance, brings about a lot of solitary confinement instances again and again. A lot of civil liberties, political prisoners, so to say, who've gone to prison have also been going through similar experiences. And in that context, is there a policy around solitary confinement? How does that get worked out? What are things we could do to push a policy like that?
From an external point of view, it might look like a disproportionate reaction, and that gets very difficult to explain to courts, especially because right now you don't have any sufficient tool to assess intellectual disability within the prison context or the criminal justice context. So it comes off across as bachpan se aisa hai. In terms of, I just wanted to make a comment on ASPD, Dr. Jasani. So this is a personality disorder which I strongly disagree with, because I think it takes into consideration too many social factors and then labels it as a disorder instead of actually trying to figure out the underlying causes of it. So, like Dr. Mahamani was saying, broken homes, a father using substances, they're all very connected with what your social surrounding is. So then to use that and then say you have a personality disorder, to me sounds very problematic. I also think that it's rife with bias, because you don't hear many stories about rich people being having ASPD. It's always the criminals who have ASPD, but that's not true. If there is a disorder like that, then surely it affects more people than just a community. Um, in terms of support systems in prison and what can be done about it, I think one of the things which we've realized and which has come from the death row prisoners themselves is to be able to engage themselves in something productive. In terms of support systems in terms of treatment and care, the prisons that we went to, either did not have a resident psychiatrist or a psychologist, or there was one coming every week or every month. So even in terms of very medically treatment and care perspective, the prisons we went to are very, very poorly equipped. What they want to do though is sedate everyone. At least the prisoners we met who had depression, they were only being told about sleeping pill le lo, theek se so jao, everything will be okay. But we all know that's not true. Um, so I think in terms of letting them work, provide is a massive amount of support that you could provide to them because a lot of this, at least the stress and distress, is coming from the fact that all they can think about is whether they're going to die or live, very broadly speaking. Um, Ma'am, to your question about reformation and from the time of sentencing till the time of execution, what can be done? Again, I'll go back to the very basic problem that death row prisoners aren't allowed to work, aren't allowed to really study in a lot of prisons. So, if we were to consider, and that's a big if we were to consider reformation as of engaging in activity as evidence of reformation, death row prisoners don't have an opportunity to do that. So you're not in those very I think to me slightly problematic terms. They won't be able to show any reformation unless you challenge these policies in court and things like that. It's not going to happen. Um, I also think that is a bit of the idea of reformation. The judiciary has never been clear on what it actually means, what it requires the prisoner to do. Whether you can plead guilty and then reform, that takes away my rights. If I plead guilty and just so I can display, remorse or reformation. So I don't think that's a viable way out. Um, but just to also let everyone know, the prisoners we interviewed have been looking at them at the appeal stage. So they are very much at between having been sentenced to death and before execution. And at this appeal stage, there is no guidelines or sort of law where you can place what you're going to do with these prisoners. These prisoners who at a high court appeal stage have a mental illness, do you commute them? Do you wait till execution? What is it that you do with them? There is no clarity there. So even in terms of just that approach, the clarity in there's only sort of clarity in how the appeal should go, but no clarity in how that should factor in the sentencing process. Um, yeah. So just the last thing I'd want to say is I think you brought up sort of a reference to the insanity defense. And so in sentencing and in this project at least, what we were very clear about is that we're not going to go back to the conviction stage. Because to us that really doesn't matter if you're guilty or innocent or you had a mental health concern at that point. What matters is what is the prison doing to you. And in some cases, has the criminal justice system really taken into consideration any of the illnesses that you might have? And of course, that's also rife with problems in that it's very difficult to reconstruct the defense, a psychiatric episode at the time of offense, which the defense requires, which you don't again need for sentencing. You don't need to know if there was a mental illness or the person was uh, operating under a delusion or an episode at that. So sentencing that way is a much lower threshold, needs to be a much lower threshold than the insanity defense. And the court has recognized that. So in a few cases, the court has said that when it comes to sentencing, in death penalty sentencing, you don't have to consider whether the person had, if the person has an unsuccessful insanity defense but has a mental illness, the court has taken that as a mitigating circumstance. But that's only 2 or 3 cases. Not many have actually gone forward to say you have a mental illness, I'm going to commute your sentence. It's always on other grounds. And even now you can see that a lot of the cases that are now coming up before the Supreme Court where there's a mental illness concern, courts are not really going into that because I think lawyers and the legal profession, they don't understand mental health. So that in that sense they rather not engage with it than this.
I think would be every prison should have a team of psychiatrists, psychologists, and other medical professionals. but that that is something which is lacking in our country. The other day I was interacting with a psychiatrist from Ireland, a prison psychiatrist, and there were 250 prisoners in that particular prison where he was appointed as a full-time psychiatrist. And here I'm catering to 5,500 prisoners. So that is the gap which is something to worry about. And regarding the open jail, yes, there is a system, and every 6 months there is a committee, and we take into consideration a lot of things like that inmate's behavior inside the prison, how many times he has gone on parole, and how many times he came back on time. And there are a lot of other criteria which we take into account, and then we select them for the open jail.
Just a couple of points. I mean, I won't labor on the antisocial personality disorder issue largely because I agree with what Maitreyi said anyway, and my own personal distaste to the whole notion of personality disorders, given the low reliability and validity to these diagnoses. I tend to think that they are frequently pejorative. We call people whom we don't like as personality disorder. That's really what it comes down to. So I'm not going to labor onto that much more. I think the 2 points that I wanted to pick up on was the whole legal insanity defense issue, and what has happened is if you look at if you look at cases where people have tried to plead unsound mind or legal insanity, our courts actually set a very high bar for that. They set such a high bar that you can't actually clear that bar frequently. So our courts will not allow, frequently not allow the unsound mind legal insanity defense because it is seen as getting away with it. Mental illness as grounds for why people should not be punished.
Jail manuals it has a provision where the superintendent of prison is required to be satisfied himself that the physical as well as the mental health of the convict who is to be hanged is as per his satisfaction. What does that mean? Not satisfied.
But this is even at the trial stage we are talking about. This judgment will apply even before the person has been sentenced to death. You've been found guilty. You've been found guilty, and at the trial court stage, you might be awarded the death penalty. In that case, what the local judgment says is that the defense has a right to produce a psychiatric report, in some ways using it as a mitigation for the sentence.
But in terms of what you're referring to, the jail manual provision about execution, so one of the cases in, again, the Shatrughan Chauhan case where there was a mental illness, good or bad, I don't know, but surprisingly, there was a very comprehensive evaluation done for one of those prisoners for a very, very long period of time. And in the end, the other person who had a mental illness claim, this person, the doctor specifically says the person is not fit to be executed. And that was what satisfied the superintendent to say, postpone, sort of, yeah. But again, superintendents are not mental health professionals, and if I have severe depression and no one is really taking note of it, am I fit to be executed? I don't know, I don't think so. But and also, I mean, just to add to that, the prison manuals focus a lot on malingering and that the prisoner might be faking it. And I think that's part of the institutionalized sort of stigma against prisoners that your first response is they might be malingering, not that they need treatment. So I think it's a whole mess about how you look at prisoners.
But I think it's 15, so to wind up, just few comments. I completely agree that there is no sentencing process once the sentence is given by the court. Whatever has come through the judicial decisions is not really going to help at the ground level. So it has to be through the legislative measures, and for which the legislators need to be made aware about the mental health aspect. Apart from what we are arguing for abolition of the death sentence. Unless that is done, and for which again my suggestion being an academician in the law college, I think the legal education needs to be strengthened in terms of mental health, as well as I think the ethical part is also missing a lot from the legal education. So on both the aspects is emphasis done. I mean, if we could succeed in framing some kind of recommendation for that purpose, it could be a great success according to me of this meeting. I just wanted to make one comment in terms of social retribution, the issue which came in the last session. We should watch Rubaru Roshni, Amir Khan's film, where three people who were interviewed. It's a kind of documentary actually, where it focuses on after the murder of persons or mass killing, how the family members have responded to it. And if that could create a kind of awareness in terms of empathy and compassion, and then speaking within the framework of human rights, what you can't give, you can't take away. I mean, the argument which always goes against the capital punishment. That needs to be thought of. I think the last point I would like to make is why capital punishment for that? It's not the sentence which is important, but the certainty with which the criminal justice system is going to operate. That's going to be more effective. Why people are more committing crimes nowadays, particularly I'm speaking for the violence against women and that too, sexual violence, we find that it's quite on increase. And the rational or the explanation which comes for that is, even if I do wrong, I won't be caught, I won't be punished. But this kind of feeling which is being created in the community obviously needs to be addressed with the certainty aspect that should be brought into the criminal justice systems. One point is with reference to the court which somebody mentioned. It's a child-friendly court. I had recently visited a court which has been developed at Amravati by the district judge who took initiative, and model child-friendly court and a victim-friendly court, even for women who are the victims of sexual violence. For them, these special courts have been developed, and it's worth taking note of in terms of getting proper justice at the judicial level. There are many more comments to make, but maybe I'll stop. It's 2:20. Thank you very much.